All right, thank you everyone. Like Jeff and Edith introduced me, I'm Leslie Brooks with Freese and Nichols. I've been working on iSWM for quite some time now, about since 2006. So I've been around for most of the changes and helped implement most of them as well. And like Jeff said, the purpose for this class and for these changes that we made, this new implementation process, is really to make iSWM more accessible to more communities within the region. What we found out from that survey and what we've kind of known from working with different cities is that iSWM wasn't working great for small cities and for really big cities. The small cities saw iSWM and they thought, this is too much. I can't incorporate all this at once. Big cities saw iSWM and said, well, we already have all this criteria. This criteria is working for us. I just want to add little portions. Why can't I do that? So really there was just kind of like the sweet spot in the middle that iSWM was, really working for people, and we want to expand that. We want to make it work for more people, and that's what these changes are all about. So what are the changes? What's this new implementation approach? Well, at the heart of it is that instead of just adopting the criteria manual, now you can become part of the iSWM program through your existing criteria and ordinances. There's still going to be requirements on that, but now you can use your existing documentation to become part of the iSWM program. A big portion of that is you no longer have to go to council for a licensing agreement. How many people here love going to council to explain technical information that's now going to be a requirement of development? No? Just me? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I love those city council meetings. I live for those. But yes, so now you don't have to. Now when you go to council, what you get to tell them is that, hey, through our existing criteria, our existing ordinances, with some minor changes that we've already incorporated, we have been recognized as a community that is advanced in our stormwater management. We've been recognized by COG. We're an elite number of cities here in the region, and that we're participating in this program to make our community better and to improve stormwater in the region as a whole. That's a lot better message than, here's a lot of equations and requirements that we're going to start putting on developers. So what we didn't do, what this new implementation approach is not about, is changing the criteria or changing the technical information that iSWM was providing you. That's still all there. It's still all the same. What we found from talking to cities is that's good stuff. It's good stuff in the manual that people really like and they're using frequently. It's really just the process of going through adoption or going through licensing agreements that's been the roadblock. All of the material in there people really like, so we kept that. We heard that and we kept that the same. If you see anything in there that needs changes or that you don't like or you would like to see change, definitely contact COG. They're collecting database on anything in the manual that might need updating, but also as well, you can always make those changes in your own documents, whether you're adopting the criteria manual or if you're doing it through your own existing ordinances and criteria. Also, we put 3 levels of adoption into iSWM. So now it's not just you're iSWM or you're not iSWM. There are different tiers of iSWM. Since the beginning of iSWM, people have been adopting certain sections or not adopting certain sections, or doing this but not doing that. And we recognize that not everybody who's doing iSWM is doing iSWM the same. And we want to make some distinctions in there to let people know, where they measure up compared to other communities, and maybe things that they could do to reach a higher level. So how are we going to do this? How do we have people use their own existing criteria and ordinances and not water down iSWM? We still want it to mean the same thing to communities. We still want it to be seen as advanced stormwater management. So how do we go about that? Well, what we came up with through talking with COG, with the iSWM implementation subcommittee, and we also had a round table of consultants that we talked to as well to get their feedback. And what we came up with is moving to more of an outcome-focused implementation. So that sounds kind of tricky, but really what it is just Outcomes are the fundamentals of iSWM. It's the criteria that directly affects development. It's the important stuff, the good stuff out of iSWM. And we like the name outcome just because that's really what we're looking for. The end game here is to improve stormwater management. That's all we're looking to do for the entire region. So it's a big goal, but it's a good goal, and it's one that we think we can achieve. So we broke it down into 3 steps of how we were going to put this new implementation approach together. Step 1, list the outcomes. That was the first step. We went through all the criteria manual, sat down with COG, sat down with the implementation committee, and really pulled out those main portions that we saw that were important. And I'll go into more detail about that. Step 2, develop the tiered measurement system. How many tiers are there going to be? How are we going to score this? Who gets to be called what? Step 3 was jurisdictional implementation. How would a city go about becoming part of this new iSWM program? How are we going to get the word out? And what benefits will we be willing to give people for adopting or buying into this new iSWM program? So starting out with the outcomes, very early on we realized that all outcomes are not created equal. There were some outcomes that are really at the heart of what iSWM is and what we're trying to do with iSWM. Those were mandatory, as the name would suggest. Then the recommended outcomes, those were ones that we see as good practice. It's probably things that most people in this region are already doing, but maybe not to the certain level that the iSWM criteria recommends, but those are under the recommended. And then optional. This is kind of where we want to go in the future. There are a little bit more advanced practices that not a lot of communities are participating in, but this is where we see stormwater moving in the future. And it's kind of, you have to have the base. You have to have the mandatory and recommended before you can really start getting into these optional outcomes. So mandatory outcomes, we came up with a list of 22 total outcomes. And the mandatory ones are listed here. It's things, I'm not going to go in detail, you have them in your handout, but it's things like the site plan review, which is just, make sure you're discussing stormwater early on in the review process. Land use conditions, which is just designing to fully developed land use. Hydrologic methods, limiting the rational method applicability. And then things like, open channel, detention. The 2 that we see most often people don't already have in their criteria are going to be stream bank protection and downstream assessments. If you're looking at getting into the iSWM program at the ground floor, those are probably the ones that you're going to have to add. If you already have those, then you're already well on your way to becoming a member of the iSWM program. The recommended outcomes, as you can see, most of these are things you probably already have in your criteria. Conveyance limits, what's the conveyance in the pipe requirements, what are your channel conveyance limits, storm drain velocity criteria, spread criteria, how much ponding do you allow on your streets, what depth to the curb do you allow, freeboard criteria. The big one here, water quality protection. Not a lot of people have that in their existing manuals, and a lot of people look at that in different ways based on what their MS4 program requires and what the city is willing to start to implement. The optional outcomes, the ones that we really focus on here are the conservation and utilization of natural features, and then also low impact design. The other ones, the open channel stability criteria, that's just requiring a low flow or base flow channel within your channel design to try to help protect against some additional erosion. Downstream timing analysis, that would be where you have detention, you're also requiring them to look downstream. Currently, iSWM doesn't require that, it's just a recommended option because there are some timing issues that could increase flooding downstream, even if you are using detention. So that's good practice that we would like to see in the future. And then TriSWM for your highways and arterials and collectors. It's just some water quality requirements for that type of street design. So now we have our list of outcomes. When but what do you have to do to meet those outcomes? We're not saying that there's only one way to do that. There's multiple ways, but we do recognize that there is an iSWM way. The iSWM criteria manual, was developed by the implementation committee, and that was their recommended criteria, so we wanted to keep that in there. So that's what full application is. Full application of an outcome means that you are meeting or exceeding the iSWM criteria, what the criteria manual states. But you can also do partial application. iSWM has always had an innate ability to put your own criteria in there or to do what you're willing to do right now in hopes of maybe increasing your participation later. And that's what we wanted to do with partial application. So you can not meet the iSWM criteria, but as long as you're still addressing that outcome and you're still meeting the intent of that outcome, if you're not doing it to the full iSWM applicability, that's okay. You still get partial application credit for that. So what does this look like? You have the handout, it's just the front and back. It says iSWM Program Implementation Tiered Measurement. So kind of a long name, but a very simple process. One page, front and back. It's just something for you to kind of score how are you doing now compared to iSWM. So, we list the outcomes, we list the full application. So this is what the iSWM criteria manual states as their criteria. And we give a reference for that. So if you want to read some additional documentation that's around that criteria, you can. And then there's a place for equivalent local criteria or ordinance reference. So that's where, if you're turning this in, if you're applying, then you would write down, Section 1, Article 8, page 5 of my ordinance meets this requirement, or it meets full application, or it meets partial application of this requirement. So we realize, and going to the implementation committee, that partial application would be the rub point. That's where you're going to have the most subjectivity, and that's where people are going to have a lot of questions. What counts as partial versus doesn't count at all? So we tried to provide some guidance on that. We developed an intent guidance document to give them an idea of kind of what we mean when we mean partial application. But really what we're hoping to do is, as communities submit these forms and as they're reviewed by the implementation review board, then we're going to start with a database that gives actual real world examples of this was submitted and approved, this was submitted and not approved for partial application. So now we get to the tiers. Now that we had our list of outcomes and we sorted them and we're allowing full or partial application, now what do you have to do to be an iSWM program, to be in the iSWM program? We wanted to keep it simple, so no math, or at least very limited math, which is always good. And we kept it with gold, silver, and bronze. It's something that's easily identifiable and most people can recognize. And here's what we came up with. So there's 10 total mandatory outcomes. And to become a part of the iSWM program, you have to implement all 10 of those. Whether you do it through full application or partial application, that'll depend on your tier, but they're called mandatory for a reason. We want to see all those iSWM program cities. We want to make sure that they're all doing something for those outcomes. The next one, the recommended, for gold, you'd have to do all of those in full application. So you pretty much have to meet iSWM criteria for both the mandatory outcomes and the recommended outcomes to be gold. And you also have to implement some of those optional as well, just 3 out of the 5. For silver, you have to do all the mandatory and recommended, but you can do them either through full or partial application. So you don't necessarily have to meet the iSWM criteria level for all of those. And then for bronze, it's all of the mandatory in full or partial, and then about half, a little more than half, 4 out of the 7 for the recommended outcomes. And then also we still wanted to recognize the founding members, so they would have a designation. So whereas one city might be iSWM Gold, another would be a founding member would be founding iSWM Gold or founding iSWM Silver. So they would just have that designation in front of their name just to let people know that they were one of the first. So step 3, jurisdictional implementation. How do you go through the review process? Once you've filled out your form and you've reviewed all your ordinances and criteria, what's the next step? Well, the first step would be a voluntary meeting with COG. It's voluntary, so it's not a required step, but COG is really anxious to help you out. They're really excited. I think Edith's made that clear in her welcome there. They really want to help you out, and they're more than willing to have that meeting with you, talk you through that spreadsheet or the point system, talk to you about areas where maybe you need to add information to meet a full or partial, or areas, if you have questions about what might be partial, they might be able to help you answer those. So if you have any questions, either once you've reviewed it or gone through it, or even if you're just at the start of it, I would say contact COG. They'd be more than willing to get with you. So then you submit your documentation. You submit it to COG, and they will submit it to the iSWM Implementation Subcommittee Review Board, which is just, it's not the entire committee. It's just going to be a 3-member board. So 3 members made up of either IIS members or representatives from cities who have already adopted iSWM. You would submit to them the form, so this one sheet, and then either the documents that you are referencing within the form or links to those documents. I would say, be considerate when you're submitting the information. Understand that, it's going to be somebody reviewing it. So if you just put on there, this is located in my stormwater ordinance. If your stormwater ordinance is 30 pages long, maybe you want to give a little bit more description or send them just the page that you really mean. If it's one sentence, maybe highlight that sentence. let people know. It would just speed up the review process. So then the documentation is reviewed by that 3-person review board. And what we're expecting is that it's going to take 60 days. So you would submit your documentation, and from the time that they have all the documentation they need to when they get back to you would be 60 days. If they're going to need additional documentation, then they would let you know within 30 days. But then it's going to take 60 days from, they have to have all the information. It's going to take 60 days from when they receive all that information to get back to you. So how does that happen? What do they say when they get back to you? Basically, we're recommending that they write essentially a letter that tells you, what tier you've made it to. They've reviewed your form. If there's anything on your form that you said, I made partial on this, full on this, and they don't agree with that, then they have to write an explanation of why they didn't agree with you and what they would need to see, what additional requirements or criteria would need to be added in order for you to meet partial requirement on that outcome. So once they've done that and sent you the information, then again, COG is more than willing to meet with you to go over that, talk about any concerns or questions you have on it, and then if necessary, hopefully not, there is a appeals process. So if you've met with COG, if you've reviewed the information and you just really don't agree with what the review board has come back with, then you can go back and make your case to the whole iSWM implementation committee, and they would vote on it as well. I wanted to talk a little bit about the benefits of joining the iSWM program. A lot of these are kind of inherent in what the iSWM program is. A lot of you know them and have heard them several times, but it's also good, usually it's not you I'm trying to convince to join the iSWM program. Usually, it's your city manager, your public works director, maybe the council. And if you're trying to get that point across of why you want to do this, that's also what this is for, is to help you communicate with them on why this is a good thing for your community. So the first one, regulatory requirements. That's always an easy one to bring up. COG has done a great job communicating with EPA and TCEQ to get iSWM recognized within those departments as something that can be used to help meet some of these requirements. So it already gets you a little bit of the way there. If you tell TCEQ that you have implemented iSWM, then that already holds some certain recognition and some clout with TCEQ. And then really it offers an effective way to deal with what we're calling like 5 critical issues: public safety, erosion, water quality, your use of resources, and better design. And I'll go into those in more detail. So the first one, public safety. When I say public safety, I'm mostly talking about flooding. It's a major problem here in Texas. We actually have the most flood-related deaths in the nation in the past 36 years, which is not something to be particularly proud of. Down here we have a map. This is all the presidential disaster declarations from 1964 to 2007 in the area. That dark blue is 8 to 10. So that's too many. One's too many, right? But a lot of times what we're doing is, with this new criteria, we're not going to fix all the old flooding problems, but the idea is to prevent any new flooding problems. It doesn't do anybody any good to do these channel projects, to do regional detention projects, to do roadway crossing projects that fix existing problems, but to let development continue to develop in a way that causes new problems. So you just have to do all those projects all over again. I guess in a sense it's some job security for us and keeps us in work, but it's not the way we want to see the community's dollars spent. So erosion, also a big concern. It's a huge impact on property value in this region. Nobody likes to see their fence or their backyard or, God forbid, their house sinking into the bottom of a creek. And a lot of times, no matter where the ownership of that creek lies, their first call is to the city. They want you to fix it. That's your problem. So again, we're not going to be able to, fix existing problems with this future criteria, but the idea is to keep these problems from getting any worse, to prevent new problems from coming up. So we do that by doing things like, managing velocities, and by, managing these smaller storm events that are more likely to cause erosion. And that's what iSWM does, and that's how iSWM helps affect erosion. Water quality. Water quality is one that, can be a little bit difficult to sell to your community, but it's something that's actually really important and more, it's not just to meet your MS4 requirements. The idea of iSWM when it comes to water quality is you're going to be treating the stormwater on site, so in small batches. And the idea behind that is if you're treating it on site, you don't have to treat it as much downstream. All this water, all this stormwater, it's getting into our reservoirs. It's getting into our lakes, into our creeks, and whether or not you realize that that's where you're treating it, these treatment plants have to take that into account. When you have to dredge your lakes, that's a large part of it as well. So instead of pushing the problem downstream, let's address it on site. It also adds a large benefit for recreational purposes. Waterfront property is always really great as long as it's water you want to be around. If that's, really dirty water with a lot of trash floating in it, that's not going to do much for your property value. And then use of resources. When it comes to, stormwater and development, there's, 3 main resources. There's the land, there's the water, and then there's the funding. There's how much money. All those are limited resources and things that need to be used with care. So we want to see land developed in a way that takes into account all those resources and really uses them to the highest, as efficiently as possible. And then better design. This is a big part of what iSWM's trying to do. We all want to live in communities that really cherish their natural features. Nobody really wants to live somewhere that's just concrete everywhere. Even in urban locations, we want these parks, we want nice landscaping on the street. We want these amenities, and stormwater can become a part of that. It doesn't have to be separate. When you're talking about landscaping, how can you incorporate stormwater into that landscaping? When you're talking about parks, what can you do with stormwater to make this park a better feature? There are a lot of ways that stormwater can be incorporated into a design that it's not being done right now. A lot of people aren't thinking about it. And then additional benefits, that's a lot of words, so I won't go into all of those, but basically, there's benefits to the municipality, there's benefits to the development community, and there's benefits to the local government as well to be part of this iSWM program. One that we mentioned up there is, possible credits towards lower FEMA CRS score. Developers working with the same technical standards and methodology. And then for local government, joining the iSWM program, providing, COG would provide staff training and help manage updates and new MS4 requirements and things like that as they come up. Yeah, definitely. And so, COG's all about helping and assisting cities and, helping them where they can. And we started looking at as well with iSWM program, what additional things can we do? What additional value can we add to the iSWM program for communities? So we were just brainstorming with them and came up with a few. We're talking about doing additional free training for iSWM communities. So just those iSWM communities would be invited and they'd have first dibs on all those seats. Also having classes at those community locations. So actually coming to you, helping with training of your staff. I say a broader audience because it is really important to get this implemented. You really want to talk to your planners, you want to talk to your maintenance crews, you want to talk to inspection. It's not just the engineering department that you need to reach out to. We talked about things for more recognition, things like city entrance signage, plaques that you can hang up in your city hall. And then ways of connecting people together a little bit better. So things like an annual banquet to invite representatives from these iSWM cities, have them talk to each other about what's working, what's not working, what they're doing differently, things that could be improved. And then something as simple as providing flyers as handouts to help you meet your outreach and education portion of your MS4 requirements. And if you have any other ideas on things that would be seen as a benefit or a plus from the iSWM program, please let us know. Let COG know. They're always interested in what more they can do to help people out. So with that, that's the conclusion of the presentation. If we have any questions, we'd be happy to take those now.